first up, I want to say that this is a very this is my take on some things. It's very anecdotal. It's not backed by any particularly scientific research. And it's full of gross generalisations, which you will immediately identify. So, I can be quoted, but, I'll deny it. No, I won't. But I just want to make quite clear that some things I'm going to say, you'll be able to immediately think of 5 examples of students who don't fit this at all or are completely different. And of course, that's the case. But I guess I'm trying to kind of get at some of the things that broadly I would observe about the space that we work in and how we've understood that over a period of time. I've actually been working around this area for 20 years this year, which is a little bit scary to contemplate. I've spent a lot of time in faculties in this university and also at Monash. So I've worked in the faculties of education, medicine when I was in psychology, architecture, building and planning, and when I was at Monash I was in arts. So I've had a lovely tour of various disciplines, which has been an absolute joy. And I've also had the pleasure of working in the central student services space a couple of times, and a couple of detours into other things, which I won't bore you with now. So that's where I come from in terms of those observations. I started out my life as a manager of undergraduate programs, and I spent a lot of time advising students about, stuff that we need to advise students about, and referring students to services such as academic skills and the various other services that we have. So that was my starting point, and that's what's taken me to where I am now, and it's been an absolute privilege to do that work. So bear in mind what I said about gross generalisations and so on. So not so long ago, our student profile might have looked rather like this. Students were probably more likely to be male and female. They were far more likely to be undergraduate than graduate. Back in the day, before our new curriculum model really kicked in, typically we would have had 75% undergraduate students, 25% graduate, and far, far less graduate coursework. So graduate students were often research students as opposed to doing master's coursework programs, which we now have in proliferation. They came from a much narrower sort of demographic base, if you like. I have said from the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and that was where a number of our large feeder schools are still located, but were much more concentrated. You could probably put on one page the list of schools that produced our students, and we knew who they were. Now the pages that produce our students go on and on and on quite much longer, which is a very good thing, and due to a lot of work that's been done by people like the National Admissions Group. If you go back far enough, students didn't pay fees. So when I was educated here, it was in the glory days of the post-Whitlam free education sort of time. And some of you will remember that HECS came in 1989, so that's now 25 years ago. And the advent of full fees, particularly for domestic students, sort of kicked in around 95, 96 from memory. That was about the same time that our university decided to get really serious about international students as well. We certainly weren't the early adopters in that space, but our then Vice-Chancellor Alan Gilbert seized that one in about 96, and we started to become really focused on enrolling international students and understanding the many benefits of doing that. And I'm talking about not just generating fee income, which is what people often go to first, but the benefits of having a truly international and diverse population. Which actually was one of the key drivers and still is. And the other thing that we know from some of the work that places like CSHE has done, of course, students spent more time on campus back in the day. There was less paid part-time work. There was just less of students doing other things. They were just here more, and that was kind of what they expected to do. So fast forward to now. Our students are much more likely to be from a far more diverse profile. So that's both where they might come from, whether or not they were born in Australia. For quite some time now, we've had about 55% of our students are females, so they've actually been slightly in the majority now for some time. Because of the way our curriculum is now working, and we have more graduate students doing those +2 programs or other graduate programs, that whole dynamic has shifted. We're almost at 50-50 in terms of the split between undergraduate and graduate. Last year it was 53-47, 53 undergraduate, 47. So this year I would fully expect it's pretty well half and half. Now, this is not a surprise to us because that's what the model was going to do the minute it was adopted. But that is enormously significant in terms of service delivery and the population that we're working with, and I don't need to tell you why that is. But working with graduate students, even if they've gone straight through an undergraduate degree and hopped straight into the MTeach or the JD or whatever it is, they are still at least 3 years older, a little bit wiser, we would like to think, and they're just coming at it from a slightly different space than the school leavers. So that's hugely significant for us. They're paying fees, and a lot of them are in quite significant debt, and that's an issue for the university sector broadly. Back in the day, it was pretty easy to move out of home, and I can certainly remember my own experience in this space. And, it was easy to find a shared house in Carlton just over the road. Rents were cheap. The houses were pretty grotty, but that's what we expected. And you got what you paid for. A whole different landscape now. Student housing is a huge issue, accommodation generally. As we attract more and more international students, that's a huge issue for them as well. So we're seeing a lot more students living at home for longer, and you'll all be aware of the data about that more broadly. And that spurns an interesting side issue around how parents are involved. And I have to acknowledge, I should have got my notes out. I will just do that. We have a visitor this week at the university from the University of Western Oregon in the States, who has given a talk earlier in the week particularly about working with parents, and I have borrowed somewhat from her wonderful slides. So Karen Sullivan-Vance, who's the Director of Academic Advising and Learning Centre at Western Oregon University, has talked about the challenges they're experiencing about working with parents, and she had a wonderful schema of describing parents as, helicopter parents, Black Hawk parents, snowplow parents, and submarine parents. So the helicopter ones hover, obviously. Black Hawk swoop in from time to time. Snowplow parents just clear a path for their students. So they ring us when they don't like the person that's teaching their student, or there's problems with their roommate, or whatever it might be. And then the submarine ones are under the water, but they pop up unexpectedly, which I love that as a schema, and feel free to use it, And the last few weeks I've spent talking to quite a few parents because I've been dealing with an issue we had around scholarships, and it was really, really interesting, and that whole spectrum was present, I can report to you. Anyway, all good. She also talks about students' sense of entitlement, and this really resonated for me. And I'm not sure that it's actually new. I'm not sure that they weren't entitled back in the day as well. But I do think, we're seeing a generation of students come through now who've had a different sort of upbringing than they had certainly when many of us were growing up. I think the advent of paying fees absolutely shifts that dynamic. So those of us who remember working with students who didn't pay fees and are now dealing with the ones who are saying, well, it's your job to, our teaching staff tell us all the time about it's your job to get me a H1, it's, whatever. I don't like that, and I'm paying your salary, so what are you going to do about it? And I'm not saying everybody does this, but it is absolutely a dynamic that we're all managing. So that's kind of interesting. And the digital native thing, which will be no news to any of you, but she describes today's students as hyper-connected multitaskers, able to access information 24/7 and completely unable to ignore irrelevant information, which I think I certainly struggle with as well. And the other thing is they're just not here as much, and we certainly have data around that. And again, this is something you'd be aware of. So students, they're working, they're doing lots of other things in their lives. University is but one part of their busy lives. And I think that is something that's really interesting for us to get our heads around. I worked in psychology 10 years ago, and we still had a very, very manual and unsatisfactory timetabling system, which involved plonking students into and we had thousands of kids doing first year psychology, plonking kids into a tutorial and then just saying that's what it is and, basically get with the program. And then they would all arrive at the front counter about now with notes saying, I can't do Friday afternoon, I'm working at Macca's or something. And I can remember saying to students, your university studies should be the most important thing that you do, and we expect you to organise the rest of your life around that, and we're not interested in anything that you have to tell us about work or any other thing, because that's clearly not your main priority. Now, I cannot imagine having a conversation like that today with a student. That was only 10 years ago. So we've learned a bit about the realities for our students around these things, but mainly about how they think about what they're doing here. And we've, in some cases, needed to catch up with that, in my view, and I think we still are. So that's a challenge for us broadly in this space. And the other thing I would observe from, a long and very happy career working in universities is how much those of us who end up in more senior roles, and I'm talking about our academic leadership as well as people like me, how much we're informed by our own experiences and our own in a sense, biases about what was good or bad about our education or our children's education or our nephews and nieces or whoever it is around us. And we bring those ideas forward. So if we went to college and had a great time at college, everybody should go to college. You know, it's just what everyone should have, you know. And I think we struggle collectively to sometimes understand that our students today think differently about some of those things, and they're not bringing the same guiding assumptions to their university experience that we might have. So for us, we have to be always alert to that. Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so some of the paradoxes and challenges that I think we work with constantly, and I suspect our colleagues from other universities, I would hope this probably resonates for as well. So students as responsible adult learners is a really important fundamental principle for all of us in services. And yet, you know, that can be a really tough line to walk, because when we can see students doing things that is self-evidently to us completely stupid or ill-advised and is not going to work out for them in the way that we would like it to, and we give them advice and they don't take it, you know, where do we step back? You know, at what point do we say, okay, you know, your call, you make the decision, you're 18 plus, that's what you should be doing. And then what is our role in mopping that up when it goes pear-shaped? And, you know, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We're not always right. There's nothing, I'm not saying we're infallible, but we are the expert practitioners in this space. So we do know a bit about what we're doing here, we like to think, and in fact, the evidence would suggest. So, you know, that is a real tension for us, I think. And it's interesting when I talk to people who work in schools with adolescents who are less, you know, who are under 18, and they have some of the same challenges but a different relationship because those students are not adults, and so that works out differently in that space. The authority and the kind of boundaries around that are different, but for us they're adults, and we have to position what we do in that context, and I think that's an ongoing challenge and paradox in some ways. We also have a very explicit commitment to student-led and initiated things, programs, whatever. Part of my job is working closely with the student union and facilitating them doing things like some of the things that we have done in the past, which we've now handed over to them, like orientation hosts, for example, now being run by the student union. We used to do that ourselves. And again, handing that over means that we give up our notions of how this should be, what it should look like, who should organise it, you know, what messages they're given. We just hand that over and say, I mean, obviously we say we want you to deliver these key things for our new students in the case of hosts, but we actually have to let go of our sense of how it should be. Again, quite a challenge sometimes. I always just like to talk about the effort that goes into looking effortless. The nature of the work that we do is such that the better we do it, the less visible it is. And that is true of much of the work in student services and administration more broadly. So our challenge is to be as seamless as possible so students have no idea how much peddling is going on under the water, nor should they. Shouldn't have to work out how we've organised ourselves, should just all work out fabulously for them without any effort on their part. And the amount of work that takes for us is phenomenal. We're a large, complicated bureaucracy. We have all the dysfunction that goes with that, you know, nothing unusual about that. It relies on people like us to make it work, and that's why it does work, because we make it work. But I've certainly learnt in a management sense that, in a sense, by making it look seamless and invisible, we also tend to underestimate the skill and effort that goes into it in terms of the management kind of dimension to that. So part of my job and the people who report to me and Guido and people like that is to actually make sure that we at the higher levels actually do understand and appreciate that expert effort, because when it's not there, we see immediately what happens. You know, things fall over very quickly, and I've certainly had that experience in the past. So there's a kind of collective educative function there that those of us in management roles need to play. So I need to be pointing out to Neil Robinson, who's my boss, the academic registrar, quite regularly, you know, this has happened in academic skills and it's taken this is how they've worked to get there, and, you know, this is the achievement, and isn't that great, and we've had fantastic student response. But just be aware of the work that a number of people have got done to get us to that point. So that's part of my responsibility in a sense. Aspirations versus budget realities. Always too many good ideas, never enough money, you know, goes without saying. There's nothing new about that. It just can be a bit stressful at times. And business as usual versus innovation and change. Now again, that's not particularly new either, but it's certainly ramping up at the moment, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But I think we have an enormous challenge in making sure that services are delivered, students are seen, iTunes are happening, you know, all the other work that you do is rolling out. The innovation that you're constantly looking at is also happening, plus paying attention to these broader agendas of change. And that is a challenge that we all face on a daily basis, but it's a real one and it's a significant one, and it's going to be thus, you know, for the foreseeable future. And that's good and exciting. There's lots to look forward to in that. But it's also, you know, I think it's a bit of a challenge for us in terms of finding the energy to keep all those balls in the air, and I don't underestimate that for a second. Okay, I just wanted to talk about a few of the things that Melbourne University's been doing around some of this reviewing and changing, and some of you know some of this, so you know, bear with me. But it's really just context for the sorts of things you're going to be talking about today and that you did look at yesterday. So some of you will know that we did a review of the student life cycle last year. So the Provost, who's my big boss, she's the boss of all of us, of course, commissioned a panel which included, oh God, I'm just having a brain snap, I can't remember her name, but anyway, a very high senior academic person from Wollongong, and somebody from Flinders, and Lynn Martin, who some of you will remember as a former academic registrar and head of university services here, who's highly, highly experienced in this space. And they spent quite a bit of last year talking to people and a lot of students about the things that were causing them pain and suffering, basically, you know, the things they didn't like about the sorts of processes and experiences that we were putting them through. And it became rapidly a quite narrowly, it started out being about everything to do with the student life cycle, from, you know, applying for a course to graduating and beyond. And it quite quickly became a much narrower focus on some of our core processes and things that students just complain about more than anything else. And I mean, none of this was particularly news to us, because every time we do a Melbourne Experience survey or anything else, we learn, you know, how students feel about things. In fact, that word cloud comes from a Melbourne Experience survey when we asked them about enrolment processes and things like that. Oh my goodness, sorry Ariana. Okay, I'm going to talk really fast. Okay, so we've done some work on those things. We're doing some ISIS enhancement work, which ISIS is our student system, and flowing from the student lifecycle review, we've done that. That's underway. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on around processes and systems and so on. But all these roads are leading to the Business Improvement Program, about which you've heard, I hope. You will have seen the Vice-Chancellor's email in the last couple of days, which talked about some of the changes happening at the very senior executive level. You may not know who some of those people are. Several of my staff have said to me, I mean, they recognised a couple of names, but, you know, it wasn't that they were close to a lot of them, so it's like, what's going on there? Completely understand that. But the Business Improvement Program is a very wide, you know, organisation-wide piece of work which, you know, is going to take us down all sorts of interesting paths. We have e-learning priorities, and we have those student life cycle recommendations. But we are looking at, you know, improving the student experience. This is what this is about. And that means we look at services, like academic skills and all our other services, and we look at, are there other ways of, you know, innovating or other service delivery models that we should be considering in this space. Now, there's nothing particularly new about that. We've been doing this for a long time. And it doesn't mean things are going to change in terms of the current model, but there is ongoing, you know, work to be done in that space, and that will be firing up big time this year. And if you can decode that email that came out last night, it certainly means that, for example, Melbourne Students and Learning, which is our current construct, which the Provost heads up, is not going to continue, and we're going to be part of University Services. And Hero's nodding at me because the library's in the same boat as far as we understand it, or this week they are anyway. And, you know, this is all still being worked through. But, you know, so there'll be some organisational changes that are important to us. Students won't care, neither should they. It shouldn't even be visible to them. And I think some of the things for us this year that we need to be thinking about is how we engage with that agenda, how we inform and influence thinking about student services. We're the experts. How do we make sure that our voice is heard in that? And people like Sam Winter and myself and Neil and so on, that's very important work for us to do, informed by what our staff tell us. Keeping up to date with latest service developments and technologies, that's something you're very familiar with. That never goes away. That's always important. And managing and meeting student expectations, an ongoing challenge which we are completely up for. And I'm sorry about that graphic, I was really running out of inspiration at that point. Having said all of that, I really want to finish on a note by saying that, you know, sometimes with all of this going on, we forget to celebrate and acknowledge what we've achieved enough. And I think that's something the whole university could do a bit more of. I have these conversations with people a lot. Academic skills has a lot to celebrate. Academic skills is one of our very high performing services, And we're very proud of the work that you all do. We get terrific feedback from students. We get wonderful feedback from our academic colleagues in faculty, so there is a lot to celebrate there. And this is one little example, because I couldn't resist putting this picture up. So there's our colleague Catherine, with some colleagues from graduate research receiving the Norman Curry Award. That was a big deal, that was a fantastic effort. And we were very, very thrilled about that. But that's just one example of, the many things that we would like to point to and remind ourselves of as we get on with kicking into another academic year. Wonderful. All right, so sorry, Ariana.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I'm going to stop right there.
Good talks. Wish we could go.
Yeah.
We might have time for one quick question, if there are any questions.
Simon.
As the parent of a 16-year-old who may be going to university in Melbourne or, in Victoria in the next couple of years, what kind of parent would you like me to be?
Nice question. It sounds terrible, but we don't want to talk to parents a lot if we can avoid it. And not because we don't like them. I've spoken to some lovely parents in the last few weeks, but we shouldn't need to, because what we hope students can do is manage themselves. Now, sometimes parents do need to be around that, particularly if there's a particular issue. But I don't want to overwork it. We love parents. I've got two who've been through university as well, and I have tried to stay so out of, and I have succeeded in staying completely out of that space. Fortunately, when my son was here, he has a different surname. No one ever connected us, and there was no need for them to, thank goodness. I think parents hopefully can trust their kids to do what they need to do, but also trust the institution to care for them, and that's kind of what we do. And what you're trying to build with parents is their trust, and hopefully, you have it. Okay,
Thanks, Elizabeth.
You're most welcome.